Bienvenida, Whitney. I know you know some Spanish, so that's why I congratulate you
Buenas
and welcome you in
tardes.
Spanish.
Buenas tardes, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, muy bien. Tuviste haciendo una experiencia en Uruguay, por eso hasta tu
Sí,
acento diría yo, charrúa.
exactamente. Y ahora estoy un poco cansada y relajada después de escuchar el último discurso.
Exactamente. Seamos vaso, balde, bañera y mar. Así que el escenario es todo tuyo. Así nos hablas de cómo comenzamos y nos predisponemos al cambio.
Muy bien, gracias. Y ahora voy a compartir mi pantalla. Ups. ¿Se puede
Pantalla.
ver mi pantalla?
En unos segundos. Producción la está poniendo, todavía no está arriba, pero ahora sí, todo tuyo, la pantalla y el escenario.
Muy bien. Bueno, es un placer estar con ustedes esta tarde y como ven, el título de esa presentación es Cambiarte comienza por vos. And so, si me permite, voy a hablar en inglés. What we're going to talk about today is you're having lots and lots of ideas. I hope you're now very relaxed. And I want you to think about some of those big things that you want to accomplish. And I'm going to teach you this afternoon a tool, a tip for how you're going to be able to accomplish all of those really big, important, audacious goals that you have. And it starts with a very simple idea and a single word, and that is disruption. Now, let me define this for you very briefly. One of my mentors, Clayton Christensen, I worked with him for about 5 years. He codified this term of disruptive innovation. And at its simplest, it is a silly little thing that takes over the world, like the telephone did to the telegraph, like Netflix did to Blockbuster, and now cable TV. The big difference with the big aha that I had is that the disruption as I was working and investing is that this idea of disruption that we were using to invest, it's not just about products, it's about people. And so personal disruption is how you take all of these ideas and make them meaningful to you. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because when you're willing to disrupt yourself, you can disrupt your company, you can disrupt an industry, you can disrupt the world. Lady Gaga, you're probably familiar with her. She is a textbook disruptor. So I'm going to illustrate what this looks like for you personally. In 2008, she went straight to the top of the charts. And what did she do for an encore? She jumped to the bottom of a new chart, one that could easily have put off all of her fans. So first of all, she collaborates with Tony Bennett on a jazz album. She then does a Sound of Music tribute at the Oscars. And then she produces a country album. But all of these jumps paid off because her performance at the Super Bowl in 2017 had the largest music audience ever. So that's personal disruption. And if you think about your lives, you've actually disrupted a lot. You were in high school, you were in college, your first job, your second job, you start at the bottom, you climb to the top, and then you jump. But the big difference with personal disruption versus a product or a company, the big difference is that you're both this silly little thing and you take over the world. You're Netflix and Blockbuster. You're the telephone and the telegraph because you are disrupting you. So I want to just talk you through the math behind this as you're thinking about, all right, well, so she's saying that if I want to do this big thing, I need to disrupt myself. Well, why will that make a difference? Let me walk you through this. So you've got on this map, and you've got your y-axis of success, what you've accomplished, how you brought your business to where it is to date. but the slope of your line is over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, and things are good. But when you disrupt yourself, you're making that decision to step back, to move from the 12 down to a 10 or a 9, because you believe that in the future, the slope of your line will be over 1, up 2, or over 1, up 3, or over 1, up 5. And so by that stepping back, you're able to grow, you're able to move forward. Now, the reason that disrupting yourself is so difficult is that oftentimes people look at you like you have lost your mind. And yet, you know that when you're willing to take that step back, because I just showed you the math of it, when you're willing to take that step back, it can oftentimes be a slingshot forward. So what I'd like to do now for the next couple of minutes, so that you can have an idea of what this can look like, is I'm going to give you 3 examples of personal disruption. 3 examples from my own life, with the idea that as I'm talking about my own life, you will have some ideas of things that you can do in your life, knowing that if you disrupt yourself, you'll be able to disrupt an industry. If you're able to conquer your mind, you can conquer the mountain. And knowing if you have a personal victory, you can have a public victory, as Stephen Covey said. So let me go to story number 1. I had just graduated from college, and I actually had a degree in music. And my husband and I got married in college, which is, I suppose, a disruption of its own. But my husband and I, we moved to New York. And I would never have gone to New York on my own. I remember driving across the George Washington Bridge, if you know Manhattan. I was absolutely terrified. For the first week, I wouldn't go anywhere by myself, but we needed to eat. And so I had to leave our 19th floor apartment and go get a job. Well, across from my desk, there was this bullpen, because I started on Wall Street as a secretary because I was a music major, because I had never set foot in a business course, because I had very little confidence. And as you may have surmised, I'm a woman. So I started as a secretary, and across from my desk, there's this sort of group of people who are all trying to open accounts, stock brokerage accounts. And so they'd say things like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know this is a good idea, and throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And at first, I'm very offended by this because I was a cheerleader in high school. But after hearing this every single day, I realized I needed to throw down my pom-poms. And I would not have known to call it this then, but that was really the beginning of me disrupting myself, disrupting my mindset, disrupting what I thought was possible. So I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics. I eventually had a boss who believed in me, that gave me an opportunity to move into investment banking. I did that for several years, eventually became an equity analyst, and then co-founded the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Clayton Christensen. And now I get to coach and I get to talk to you today about these ideas of personal disruption. So that's the first story that I wanted to tell you, is this idea of disrupting what you thought your future would be and looking at things differently. All right, so that's the first one, is stepping back from how you're thinking about the world, making that decision to disrupt yourself. Now, the second story was, now I'm working on Wall Street. I'm an investment banker, and I have a boss who gets fired. And they probably would have fired me too, but I had good performance reviews. I happened to be pregnant with our first child at the time, so they probably weren't going to fire me. So they moved me, but they really shoved me. They pushed me back. So in this case, I was disrupted into equity research. And once I got to equity research, I think that I'm going to cover the cement and construction sector, but they already have a cement and construction analyst. Equity research feels like I'm going from flying a fighter jet to a cargo plane. What am I going to do? How am I going to play where no one else is playing? I've got to figure out how to disrupt the situation. I've been disrupted, but what am I going to do to disrupt myself? Well, it turns out that there were a number of media companies going public, no analysts to cover them. And as the theory of disruption would dictate, rather than knocking on a door that was very closed, I built my own door. I built my own media door. And by doing that, within just 1 year, I became a ranked analyst. And it turns out that in this instance, I was disrupted. So that was the impetus. But when I was willing to disrupt myself, figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to play where no one else was playing, in that year, I became an analyst. It turns out that this was a career maker for me. I was a much better equity analyst than I was an investment banker, which now brings us to the third story. Oh, let me go back. I stepped back. I was pushed back in order to slingshot forward. And I was covering telecom and media, by the way, in the emerging markets. So I covered America Mobile, which is throughout Latin America. I covered a company called Televisa that you may be familiar with. So a number of telecom and media companies in Latin America. It was a slingshot forward. I was an institutional investor, equity, or ranked analyst for about 8 years. So that's my second example, is that sometimes you're going to get disrupted. Then the question becomes, what do you do? How do you disrupt yourself? We've all been disrupted by COVID. What are we going to do to disrupt ourselves, to act instead of being acted upon? Now, the third example that I want to share with you is something that I call micro disruptions. And this is, in fact, the most important one. This is the thing that you're going to do every single day. Again, it goes back to disrupting your mindset, stepping back from who you are to slingshot into who you want to be. And this one has to do with failure. So one of the things that I have noticed is that I've had many failures in my life, and we don't have time for me to go through all those failures, but they include things like bombing speeches in front of hundreds of people. I've been fired from a job. I've backed and invested in a business that completely blew up. And the speech, they didn't like it. They hated it. I have all the comment cards to prove it. When I was fired, I was absolutely devastated. I thought I would never recover. And the business that blew up, how could I claim to be who I said I was? But here's the thing that I've learned. The failure wasn't actually the problem. It was the shame. It was the shame that I attached to the failure. And so one of the challenges for me, and perhaps for you, is how do I take the shame out of the equation? How do I disrupt my view around failure? And someone who's helped me with that is a person by the name of Alan Mulally. You may have heard of him. He was the CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, and then he turned Ford Motor Company around. 3 years ago, I was having a conversation with him about how does he think about failure? And he said, I don't. And I asked him again, no, really, how do you think about failure? And he said to me again, I don't. And I tried a third time, and he finally said, Whitney, I don't think about failure. I see when something doesn't work, that's a gem. There's something for me to learn. And so that has helped me in that process of reframing failure. And I hope it will help you, because here's the lesson that he taught us, is that whether we see an experience as a failure or success, it is always a choice. It's always a choice, even when you lose your job. I would argue that sometimes when you lose your job, you know it's time for you to do something new, and you don't quite have the courage to do it. And so the universe gives you a nudge. So it's shame that limits disruption, not failure. And this is the third example. So the first example I shared with you was this idea of, I'm not going to go through yet. Number one was I chose to disrupt my mindset on Wall Street, thinking about what was possible. Number two, I was disrupted, but then I figured out, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to create with this? I'm not going to compete with what is, I'm going to create. Turned out to be a career maker. And then number three, the most important, I would say, is those micro disruptions of what's happening in your head every single day, that decision to reframe situations. Perhaps it's failure, perhaps it's something else, so that you as an individual can continue to make progress. And when you're able to take that shame out of that equation, that big, hairy, audacious thing that you want to have happen, it becomes possible. because you're able to iterate faster and faster and faster. You start at the bottom of that ladder, you climb to the top, and then you jump to the bottom of a new ladder. So now just a few closing comments. I want you to take a look at this broken asphalt, and you're probably thinking, why is she showing us asphalt? Well, here's what I want you to know. Asphalt can handle thousands of pounds of pressure. And so then the question becomes, well, why did it break? Well, it broke because it rained, it snowed, there was a tiny little crack, it got into the crack, the water froze and expanded, and it broke because asphalt cannot handle internal pressure. You and I, we're like asphalt. So when change comes, we have this idea that we want to affect. We feel under siege, we batten down the hatches, we do more of what we've been doing, hoping to resist what's pounding against us. But if you have the courage to do something new, just a few drops of water, permeate, expand, and break your hold on the past, creating space for something new and different. So Leo Tolstoy, famous Russian author, wrote War and Peace. He knew something about external pressure. He also knew about internal pressure because he wrote Anna Karenina. Here's what he had to say. Revolutions are an attempt to shatter the power of evil by violence. We think that by hammering upon the mass, we will be able to break it into fragments. But this only makes it more dense and impermeable. Disruptive movement must come from within. I'm going to say that again. Disruptive movement must come from within. In other words, if you want to go up, you disrupt. All right, one final thought. One of the things that people don't tell you, the textbooks on disruption do not tell you, is that disruption is by definition scary and lonely. So when you leave this comfortable perch of doing what you've always done, which you're going to have to leave, you're going to build that big goal that you want to build. There's this loss of identity. There's this moment of free fall. The PE ratio, the puke to excitement ratio, is so uncomfortably high you feel like you're on a thrill ride to zero. It doesn't mean you shouldn't disrupt. It just means if you're scared and you're lonely, you're on the right path. If you want to be an agent of disruption, you first become its subject. And final thought that I want to have for you is companies don't disrupt, people do. So do I dare disturb the universe? Do you?
What an inspiration. What an inspiration, Whitney. And I highlight the words choice. I also want to highlight this idea that we attach shame to failure, but failure or success are choices. And I also have the idea that what we attach to failure, this shame, is an individual choice, but is a cultural choice as well. And I think we have to work on both.
What a great observation.
Okay, Whitney, thank you very much. I hope we continue the conversation in the next weeks and months and learn more about how we disrupt ourselves. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you as well. Take care.